I grind for the love of the game. With passion, determination, and drive, we strive. We grind for the love of the game. Sifting through messes in the Midwest requires a deep dive. Welcome back to PTJ, everybody.
Good to see you, Flying J.
It is good to see you. Grinding through not even a game time decision. I think we were locked in, but Nate is a bit under the weather, and so I appreciate you being here. And
yeah, my first bout with COVID. I finally got it. I tempted the fate. I talked too much smack that how I can never get it, and I finally got it. So I'm on day 3 here, but I figured, all right, I got all this free time. I'm sitting at home. Like, this is the perfect time to do a little research and get a pod out. So I'm glad that the timing worked out for this.
It actually even opened up the schedule of when we could record. So shout out to COVID for the flexibility as well as you.
Just want to see you, COVID.
Yes,
you ruined my steelhead fishing trip this weekend, but opened up a recording slot. So it's somewhat of a push.
Despite my temptation to continue engaging in personal COVID talk, I guess we'll get into the pod. So welcome back to Projecting the Jump. Thanks to everyone who is watching the video on YouTube. If you're consuming the audio, if you're doing both, we appreciate it. So today we're going to do, much like this summer, we had a Houston Rockets deep dive. That was just one team focus. Today we're doing mini dives. We're going to talk about 2 teams today. I've been grinding hard on the Memphis Grizzlies, while Natron Clean has been hard at work trying to figure out what the hell's going on in Charlotte. So how you feeling after getting your head, kind of in the space of, okay, I have to analyze the Charlotte Hornets from a fantasy perspective. Was that a good time?
I kind of got into that hive mindset a little bit, but
lost Natron Clean there. I brought up the Charlotte Hornets. I asked if you were ready, and you promptly hung up this podcast, didn't you?
The Hornets are a scary subject to enter into, and apparently even computer software, just the algorithms just didn't even like it at all. So we'll see what the clicks look like on this pod. But this isn't looking good at this point.
I think they have special coders to handle processing and Charlotte Hornets information. So if there's anyone listening that does any of that, please reach out to us. We'd appreciate it. So before we get into our mini deep dives on the Grizzlies and the Hornets, we wanted to touch base on some of the bigger news to hit this week, and that would be over in Philadelphia. So I wanted to do a little check-in on the post-Embiid injury landscape, particularly in the center position. So as we know, Joel Embiid, you don't want to hear Embiid and meniscus and left knee in the same sentence. So there's not a timetable yet, but I had posted on the Projecting the Jump Twitter that I think B-Ball Paul became a swerve your car as you scramble for phone must add a couple days ago. And then he promptly had 30 points and 13 rebounds and a start. Actually, that was just January 27th. That was before the news came out, but that was in a start. So I just wanted to quickly touch on who B-Ball Paul Reed is a little bit. And then just kind of, we'll talk a little bit of Embiid versus, of Paul Reed versus Bamba. So Paul Reed, aka B-Ball Paul, was a 3-star recruit out of Florida. He went to DePaul. He averaged 15 points, 10 rebounds, and almost 3 blocks. He was the 58th overall pick in 2020. Can you, Natron Clean, guess who Mr. Irrelevant from that draft was? I'll give you a hint. His last name reminds us of an outdoor outfitter that is popular in Oregon.
So something Columbia or I don't know. Who is this? I don't know.
This is your boy Sam Merrill Apparel. He was the 60th pick.
Apparel.
He's been hanging out, man. So yeah, the 58th pick in the draft. Unfortunately, they missed their chance to grab Sam Merrill there. But traditionally, since he was drafted, and when he gets an opportunity, I think that B-Ball Paul is towards the top of our permanent monster list when given the opportunity. So for me, it's a no-brainer. When something like this happens, he's the player I want. What was your initial take on B-Ball Paul? Were you willing to swerve your vehicle, or did you think it was a little closer between him and Bamba than I do?
Well, I think first off, I think Mo Bamba, and I've thought this ever since the draft, that he's a giant bust. I didn't understand why he was drafted so high. it didn't seem like he actually liked basketball out of Texas. He certainly has all the physical tools, but I think as far as actually having the desire to put it together, it wasn't necessarily there. So I'm not a believer in him long term. Although he has had stretches where he brings a very fantasy friendly profile as far as hitting threes and blocking shots at a pretty elite level just because of his wingspan and size. So my initial thought, I know that you were super bullish on Paul Reed, and he is, like as you mentioned, a permanence monster. I am quite curious to see and if they unleash him, if they fully unleash him or not, because if as you say, and I think it's worth the ad. I mean, it's certainly worth the ad. It's definitely worth the ad. But it's there's a decent chance that we do see a 30-minute Paul Reed, and if that's the case, then you're looking at a top 60 guy, top 50 guy, maybe. But I just kind of, my hunch is that they're going to kind of more platoon it a little bit, and we'll see a little bit more uses going to Tobias Harris. The Reed's minutes might go from 10 to 20, and he could still have a lot of fantasy relevance, but I'm not necessarily willing to coordinate him at this point.
Yeah, that's all fair. It's a good breakdown. I have him penciled in for more like about 27 minutes a game. That's what he was able to play in his starts against, I believe, the Jazz yesterday. And so I pulled up #basketball's next man up tool, which I love doing when I'm trying to get a gauge of what to expect post injury. So luckily we have a decent sample size. 13 games for Paul Reed this season without Joel Embiid and 12 for Mo Bamba. And in those 13 games, Paul Reed is averaging 26 minutes a game, 11.6. Wow. Yeah, that surprised me too. I will be honest that what I'm about to tell you did surprise me a bit, but it does confirm my priors a little bit. So Paul Reed, 26 minutes a game, 11.6 points, 7 boards, 2.5 assists, 1.5 blocks, and 1.2 steals. He doesn't kill you from the free throw line. He's a 69% shooter, and he's a 56% field goal shooter. So Mo Bamba, 16 minutes a game. And again, I think there could be some game-to-game variance, but I think this is close to what it will look like in a couple of weeks if we see him beat out, and I think we will for at least 3 weeks. Mo Bamba in 15.7 minutes, 6.3 points, 5 boards, under a dime, 0.6 steals, 0.7 blocks, like you said. His 3-point shooting, he takes 0.6 a game, makes him at a 39% clip. And his field goal percentage is at 50. So yeah, you get 0.6 threes. With Reed, you get 0.5 threes. So that's actually kind of a wash there. So yeah, I like Mo Bamba's skill set as far as like, what he should be able to do if he really cared. B-ball, Paul Reed's just kind of a grinder. So in a deeper format, I like a grab of Mo Bamba, but I'm calling Paul Reed a must-have in every 12-team league, regardless of size. I cut Malik Monk for him in our league record, and I didn't really hesitate. I just think I might be able to find that kind of scoring, grab it like we talked about a Tim Hardaway or even Harrison Barnes when he's hot, or Ini Bogdanovich if they're available. And I just think it's harder to find a center. He's power forward eligible too, so you get the power forward and center eligibility. They could be top 60 for a month. So for me, you got to grab Paul Reed.
You see him. It sounds like you see him almost in a Daniel Gafford type role the rest of the season.
Yeah, I think so. I think he's a more talented NBA basketball player than Gafford, but kind of like Mo Bamba, I think Gafford's a good comp in that we don't care how good he necessarily is if he's putting up the numbers and has the role. So the good call. Yeah, I think he's a little more talented, but he has the Gafford role. And they're invested in him. He was 50th overall pick, but they've kept him. They matched. It was actually the Jazz that gave him a 3-year contract, I think, for about. And so they matched that. It was 3 years and I believe $41 million. And they paid him. So now's the time to cash in on that investment with Embiid out.
That's a good point. I forgot about that restricted free agency signing.
Yeah, and so I think it was a good match, but at the time it's one of those a little similar. And you brought up when we did our Glue Guys episode on Nas Reed, you're thinking, how are you budgeting that out? And honestly, the Sixers might have been wise to cash in on their investment a little bit early. I don't know if you watched that game against Golden State. I actually had a 4-way parlay, and he was the last leg, and it was a big hit, and I bet the over under scoring kind of like a fool, just because I had he had missed a couple games, but I was thinking he would be well rested. He was not ready for that game. He looked hobbled. It was really uncomfortable to watch.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, it'll be interesting too. I mean, and when we kind of wrap this up, but I'll be curious to see if the Sixers use some of that draft capital that they got to bolster their front court rotation just until he can get back if they think that this is their title chances too. So more to come, I think, on that as well. But but we're both really interested in seeing what Paul Reed can bring.
Yeah, good call. They definitely have been linked to some big names, and I think they're going to need to make a move here. We're going to make a move to our mini deep dive. So, what's calling your name? Is it Charlotte Hornets, who you did hang up when I brought them up, or do you want to start with looking at what the heck's going on in Memphis?
Well, I'm thinking maybe let's start with the Hornets. We'll put our listeners to sleep, and then you can gently wake them back up with this Grizzlies talk. It's kind of keep people guessing a little bit that way.
For full effects, put this next part of the pod on 0.5 speed.
But so I was curious about we wanted to investigate a few of these teams that for all intents and purposes have been eliminated from the playoffs already, and so they don't necessarily have anything to play for as far as real wins and losses go. But clearly they have a lot of guys that can bring a lot of fantasy value to the table, and a lot of new names that we're not quite sure how those are all going to shake out, and so we will each want to kind of take a look at some of these things, and wanted to start with the Hornets here. And so they're finally, after a decade or so of spinning their wheels under the Michael Jordan leadership in an attempt to sell out to get the 8th seed, are finally tearing everything down to the studs. But just to kind of keep this construction analogy going, they're finding out that even some of the studs have some dry rot and termite damage too. So, but it's interesting. So, I mean, gone is Terry Rozier as of January 23rd, and his 23 points and 27% usage is off the table. And we have the trade deadline coming up in just a few days from now, about a week. And so we'll see what else comes down the line. Perhaps gone is my guy, Gordon Hayward, who's 51% rostered for some reason.
I do want to say, never have I been less excited about a usage vacuum being created than when Rozier went to Miami. You're looking at it and you're like, okay, if you already have a guy that some usage funnels to, great. But yeah, man, I'm looking forward to hearing where the intrigue is on that one, because once Rozier went out the door, I was like, well, that's okay.
Yeah, there wasn't a lot of guys that were like screaming for that like spot. It was more like, huh, okay, what are they going to do with this? And then, but perhaps also kind of factored into this, maybe Dunn is your guy, Mark Williams too, who's still 76% rostered for some reason. We have no timetable on him, and
disgusting.
And it doesn't look promising at this point.
At least we've gotten some quotes now, some ugly quotes that make me wish I wouldn't have held so long and then wasted fab money picking him up on a Monday morning.
What could you do? I mean, for 2 months ago, it looked like it could have been only a day or two. So
good point.
It's hard to say. But so we just kind of wanted to take a look here. What can we look for in the second half of the season? Is there any waiver wire gems sitting here? Any sell highs? But before we get into it, I just wanted to quickly ask you about the Hornets and get your opinion. Teal seems like a really polarizing color. Thumbs up or thumbs down on the jersey?
Teal has a special place in my heart. It reminds me of 1994. Not, when Grandma Ma was all the rage, dunking in dresses and Converse. Or was it Reeboks? I don't know. Reeboks, Converse, whatever he was wearing. And besides the Sonics back in the day as a 90s kid, I think I wasn't even one to do this. I had Hornets gear too. I had Orlando Magic gear. They were brands to me. I loved NBA. I just loved NBA gear. And so, I had the Hornet starters jacket. And now, I think it's blasphemous to rock gear from the team that isn't yours. You don't get to just wear it like it's cool because you found it at a vintage store. You need to support you can't just have it all. That's my opinion. So a little soapbox. I think teal can be overrated at times. It's not for every occasion, but I appreciate what it brought to us in the early 90s. And when done right, teal can be elite. It's a great question.
Yeah, I mean, you have a teal adjacent shirt on right now, and I'm sitting next to a teal adjacent wall behind me. So I think kind of says something here. And then the last one is their court. That's a pretty polarizing court there. The Hive Beacombe court, pro or con?
Yeah, it's the CLT for me on the jersey. That's what gets
No,
me.
it's bad. That's a bad court. That's a really bad court and
I,
bad. Yeah, that jersey too. With no good. The teal's awesome. That jersey, no.
that for some reason that Beehive court reminds me of David Wesley's ears. That in the late 90s, early 2000s, the Baron Davis kind of era teams.
Oh man.
I kind of was fond of the court, but it seems very distracting. But after some of these courts they were rolling out, the city edition courts,
Oh yeah.
take me back to the mundane days of the Hornets courts.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. We've seen some extremes. All right. So kind of to launch in the players here, I'm going to kind of run through most of the roster, a couple of the guys deep, and then just kind of cruise through the rest of the roster here. So the first question I wanted to ask is, kind of if you're rostering LaMelo, what are you doing with him? On one hand, he's the number 23rd player as far as per game averages on the season. On the other hand, he's missed 24 of them. In fact, he's the Hornets have been building around him, but on the other hand, and he's one of the most entertaining players in the entire league. As far as like if you could go to watch a game, he's going to be a fun ticket to watch. He's one of the highest selling jerseys. I understand why they're building around him. On the other hand, I think in real life he's one of the most overrated players in the league, and he misses an incredible amount of time as far as rostering him for fantasy purposes. In fact, he misses an average of 32 games per year.
And I imagine having him in Dynasty, like season long is one thing, and that's frustrating. You kind of knew what you're getting into when you went after LaMelo. Maybe you bought low on him, and that's cool. But like Dynasty as an asset, it's tough because he does this every year. You know what I would have liked to see? What would LaMelo Ball look like now if the Warriors would have taken him over James Wiseman in that draft in a winning culture? Because it's not just the injuries; it's the lackadaisical play. It's that he acts like he acts like he's the only one in an and one mixtape. you
yeah.
know,
It's a complete ridiculous disinterest to defense other than going for steals. Even in that time when they were in the play-in game, he couldn't even be bothered to like run back up in the court. It was tough to watch.
I remember that playing game. The playing game was hideous.
Oh, it was terrible. So here's the question I wanted to ask you. So I mean, I think the Hornets are bad enough that he's not a shutdown candidate. That they can lose with or without him, and it doesn't really matter. Will they be a little bit extra careful with his current and upcoming ankle injury? Probably. But so my question is, if you roster him, or if you don't have roster him, is he a buy low or a sell high candidate? So if you, I guess I want to ask you that first, and then if you're rostering him, I have some fake trades for you then at that point too.
I'm looking forward to that. I don't roster him anywhere personally. And to me at this point, I think you missed the sell high window. I think now people you take the history coupled with what's happening now as far as him being doubtful every game, the Hornets having nothing to play for, and they don't need to lose games, but they're perfectly willing to, I hate the term shutdown. It's definitely overused. But depending on when your fantasy playoffs are, and the Hornets have a 2-game week in the standard fantasy playoffs, which is I know something Josh Lloyd has talked about a lot when referencing LaMelo. So you got the 2-game week, and I think a lot of if you're playing in the April, you're not gonna have LaMelo Ball in your fantasy playoffs. So take a look at when your playoffs are and to kind of judge his value for your team. But I think you just got to hold him. I think you're not going to get value unless if there's just a huge LaMelo fan. And by now, if you have LaMelo Ball, I bet you've thrown out plenty of trade offers. If you haven't, you're being irresponsible. But I would trade him for Cade Cunningham. I would trade him, and I'm looking forward to hearing some of yours. But maybe somebody with like less ceiling, less per game value. It's going to be difficult, but he is a popular player, so I never want to say never. But my guess is that you're going to just want to hold and try to soak up the weeks when he does play. Maybe try to sell high at that point if your trade deadline hasn't passed. But buying low on the Melo, I'm not interested unless if it's a Hail Mary. If you are 8th or 9th in your league and you just need talent, I could see it.
Yeah, that's a really good thought for that. That's much better than the fake trades that I had brought up. And I just kind of was curious about whether you trade him for somebody like a top 75. Would you trade him for a Drew Holiday or a CJ at this point? Like, are you willing to exchange upside for stability? But I think the way that you referenced as far as where you are in the standings makes a lot more sense.
I'm in the top three, Nate, and I have Drew Holiday, I will definitely trade him for a shot at LaMelo Ball. I think that's a pretty good one. CJ, it's a little closer, but again, if I have a deep team, sometimes when you look at your roster and you think to yourself, how am I going to pick up a guy off the waiver if I need to because my team is just too deep? If I could put LaMelo into an IL plus in and out and trade CJ and open up a streaming spot, I might consider something like that. But that's a bit of a galaxy brain move. It might not pay off, but that sort of thing entices me.
Yeah, I guess it depends on how many IR positions your league has as well.
Yeah, and weekly moves as well.
Yeah. So moving on with him out of the lineup, which he has been for a good chunk of the season, the actual flow of the team has seemed to be what just watching the games has gone really through Brandon Miller and Miles Bridges. Brandon Miller has been one of the most popular pickups over the last month or so, and he's really flourishing offensively. Then the number 71st ranked player since the Scary Terry trade, and offensively, he just looks a lot more confident. So it looks like he's playing under control, playing without that. In summer league, we just saw a guy that everything was moving pretty quickly, didn't quite put it together, and at this point, things have really slowed down for him. He's averaging 21, 4.5, and 3, 2.5 threes, good percentages. The defensive numbers are the only thing holding him back at this point. Although that being said, tonight he had 6 stocks, so
he had a crazy game tonight.
He had a crazy game, and he should, you watching him, you think that he should have that because he's got the length, he's got the athleticism, so that could be coming. And so my questions for you in regards to Brandon Miller here are twofolds. Is first off, are we seeing the current high watermark for Brandon Miller on the season at 71, or do you think that there's another gear that he can finish the second half of the season with, or is this more of an opportunity that he's kind of on a heater and might want to just investigate whether you can get top 60 value back in the trade?
I would prefer personally to sell high if I could get top 60 value for a number of factors. The number one factor being the name on the jersey. I do think that they're going to try to feature him, but I just don't trust the Hornets, man. If I could lock in a piece that I know is, I don't know, like I'd probably rather have DeJounte Murray rest of season. The name just kind of popped in my head. And maybe you could package Brandon Miller with a piece and get somebody like that, a 45 to 60 player who people get tired of having because they're just a middling veteran, but really they're stable. I'm not sure because it's interesting. My personal experience with Brandon Miller in fantasy so far is I've traded him and I've dropped him. I traded him in a dynasty league to get Kristaps Porzingis in a league where you can keep him as you can keep a rookie. So it's a league where you keep 5 players. And so he was not going to make my cut next year, and you get to keep 1 rookie, 5 players and a rookie. I have I have 12-1, I think maybe 13-1 now, and I'm just like pile driving towards this title. So I was willing to move him to a team, and I picked up Vince Williams Jr., who we're going to talk about, and the production's been the same, but obviously the pedigree is very different. So he's a perplexing one. I don't have a really clear answer on what to do with Brandon Miller, other than if somebody's salivating, I'm willing to trade him for the right package.
Yeah, I guess it's all about whatever everybody else values him at.
It does.
So speaking of how you value him, just a quick hitter before we move on. The better career long term when it's all said and done. You taking Jabari Smith or Brandon Miller?
Brandon Miller.
Yeah, I think I might too as well. I think the offensive ceiling is a little bit higher.
There's been too much regression this season and just the clunker games. And I guess you see him out of a player like Brandon Miller as a rookie too. And next year he'll probably, I would think he's not going to take a jump to like, top 40 young, 40 player in the league. So maybe it's a similar case. But I think I'd rather take the scoring upside of Brandon Miller.
Yeah, I like that.
That's a good question. Well constructed.
Yeah, so last of the real Hornets guys, then I'm gonna kind of just do some quick hitters on some more of unearthed guys. So that's PJ Washington to touch on here, who's actually been the biggest beneficiary since the Terry Rozier trade. He's the 64th ranked player in the league since Rozier has moved on, and that was highlighted by that 43-point game that he had a couple days after the trade, which just kind of came out of nowhere, and it was
classic PJ.
Yeah, and luckily I randomly streamed him that day.
Did you really?
But
nice.
I did. Yeah, it didn't even make any sense. It was just a chance. But since the trade, he's averaging 19 points, 4.5 boards, two assists, basically 3 threes and 1.5 stocks, great
Ooh.
percentages. I mean, it's just been really putting it together. Uh, I was watching him. Went through and watched the game earlier today, and just kind of, I was just curious. I wanted to just spend a whole half just tracking him and watching him play, because I
Nice.
wanted to get a sense. He kind of just blends in on the court, and so he's an easy guy to miss. And so I just wanted to just see what he looks like the entire game. And
Wait, were you
my take,
grinding for the love of the game?
my
I think
my
you
COVID
were.
was scorching hot, so I had nothing else to do but sit on the couch. Um, yeah, but I came away thinking he was an interesting player because he is I'm calling him slow feet and fast hands. He often was slightly out of
Mm,
position, a half step slow, but he was able to get his hands into passing lanes and disrupt passes, get blocks.
yeah.
He was able to get some shots off when he didn't necessarily have enough space or to get a really good look, but he was able to kind of make those. So it was an interesting thing. At this point,
Slow
he's
feet, fast
seven.
hands. I love it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was the strangest thing. I didn't leave watching that game with any clarity, and so this is where I'm going to ask you about it,
Yeah.
and hope that you provide me the clarity. But I got two questions for you on about PJ Washington. At this point, he's 70% rostered. So he's owned in most places, and I think at this point, he's pretty safe to say that he's a rest of season hold if possible.
Right.
But first off, and this isn't necessarily about PJ Washington, but I kind of was thinking like he's a rest of season hold if possible. The caveat being that if it's a Sunday and he's not playing, you drop him, you stream in somebody else to win the week. And so I was trying to think, we kind of need a name for that type of player, a guy that you're willing to drop in case of emergency. And so I was trying to think of a name for it, and I want to hear if you have anything on the tip of your tongue. The closest one that I had that came to mind was like a weekday warrior. He's grinding for your team Monday through Friday, but
Yeah.
weekend comes, he doesn't have any games. You could probably drop him. But
That's pretty good. We got to workshop this. I like it. First thing that popped in my head was last cut all stars, like the
last cut all star.
team of the players that can be your last cut, but you prefer not to.
I like that. I like that all snub team. Um, yeah, but the main one I had about PJ Washington though is, and I don't know if you have a take on this or not, but I
I got PJ
I
takes all
just
day.
don't I just don't know, and I've wondered about this for 2 years. The question is he a better real life player or a better fantasy player?
Let me take a deep breath. I have a lot of feelings about PJ Washington, so we'll start from the beginning. Yeah, he's UK 2K. He's University of Kentucky alum. He played 2 seasons there.
Wildcat corner.
Little Wildcat corner for you. Why I loved your slow feet, your slow feet, fast hands observation was because in college I was like, is this dude 29 years old? Like
Hmm.
he played high block exclusively. He shot a lot of 18 footers, and like at any time he wanted, he could just like turn around, take 3 dribbles, and just like get a layup. Like at any time, he was just like an athletic specimen that liked to shoot jumpers. And he did play kind of slow and methodical. And you could kind of just tell there was a lot of meat on the bone with what you were seeing in college as far as his talent. And he continues to leave meat on the bone. Yeah, I think he's an incredible talent. I think he's more talented than he is productive in fantasy, and I think he's a better fantasy player than he has been an asset to an NBA team at this point, with the caveat that he's only played for the Charlotte Hornets. So give the man a break. We're not sure because he's never worn
Hmm.
another jersey. Until he takes off the CLT, I don't know if we'll ever fully know.
Yeah, it's fair. I am so curious on what his trade value is around the league, and I wouldn't
Yeah.
be surprised if a team were to throw out, you know, two first round picks and a swap for him. And I also would be surprised if he just went for 4 seconds or something silly.
Well, Nate, he was a free agent until like Labor Day. Do you remember? He was like one of the last relevant players.
It didn't make any sense. I
Yeah.
I just assumed somebody was going to dangle a fat contract for him, and like you said, he was the number 12th overall pick in the draft, so he's got a good pedigree. But
I dangle
um,
something fat. And I got you.
that's not for this pod. That's for your only fans. But it's sometimes the content blurs on this thing here.
I, thank you. Yeah, I don't I don't have anything to say.
So moving on to
Please, back to back to Bryce McGowan, please.
Bryce McGowan's exactly who I was going to go for, and he's a guy that I feel like we have to talk about because he is at this point starting. He's starting the place of LaMelo, and there's some things that are intriguing about him. You know, he's a second year player. He's a second year player that's starting, and so for that reason, you have to take a look at him. He had a great game tonight. Put it together kind of defensively. Watching him, he looks to me like a lanky teenager DeJounte Murray.
He does. He has a similar looking body. He doesn't have the same like giant shoulders, small head, but the arms and like, yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah. And he does. I mean, he still has bigger shoulders than most guys with his frame have. Like, it looks like he's going to grow into it at some point, but just hasn't. And he was a second round pick out of Nebraska. He came out of Nebraska after, just after his freshman year. For some reason, it didn't really make a ton of sense, and so he got drafted super late in the second round. But he's had 11 starts to this point for Charlotte, and watching him play, the game just looked a little quick for him. He didn't quite sure when to assert himself, when to kind of take shots. There's been a couple instances that even when he had the opportunities, the confidence wasn't quite there. But I think he's somebody you need to keep a close eye on. He had a great game tonight versus Oklahoma City, but I think it's a more likely you're keeping an eye on him for next year. But keep an eye on him. You got to keep an eye on anybody starting at this point.
Well, anybody who played DFS last April knows the name Bryce McGowan's, and he's a name when silly season hits that I think we'll be talking about again. Even though shouldn't be silly season now for the Hornets, it is. But they're still pumping, some minutes into some established players. So I think Bryce McGowan's usage could go up as the games become even more meaningless, not just for the Hornets, but for their opponents.
Yeah. So the last two names, just kind of touch on one really quickly. Nick Richards, he needs to be picked up in more places. He's just 52% rostered. We've all been slow.
He finally
been all slow to do it.
Yeah.
And I understand why. They were stringing us along, like we mentioned, on the center rotation. But at this point, you got to pick up Steve Adams lights. He's just giving you the production. So it's not sexy, but you got to do it. And the one guy that I'm actually quite curious on. This is somebody that I'm not advocating to pick up now, but I think we want to keep a close eye on him. And I'm kind of thinking that he's going to be on quite a few rosters come playoff time for fantasies. That is Nick Smith Jr.
Yes, good call. This is a good name to stash away.
He's a rookie out of Arkansas, and he's a really interesting case. So it's a really fascinating guy, and so I think there's a lot of reasons to be paying attention to him. He was a first round pick out of Arkansas. He was kind of the less heralded backmate of Anthony Black in the draft.
I liked him better when I watched Kentucky games. I liked him better.
Oh, nice. Yeah. It was interesting. So he was a consensus top 3 recruit out of high school. Consensus 5-star, a lot of 24/7 Sports had him the number 1 recruit out of high school.
I did not know that.
Either did I. But due to knee injuries, he was only limited to 7 games at Arkansas. Yeah. So he just didn't quite get the run, and he decided to go into the draft. Right. And for that reason, he slipped to number 27.
Great value.
Yeah. And part of that might have been the knee question marks there. Part of it could have been that coming out of high school, all the recruiting services had him listed at 6'5", and then he measured at the combine at 6'2", kind of a big difference. But watching him play, they're really finding minutes for him at this point, which I think is smart. At this point, once again, like McGowan, the game looks a little quick for him. He's not totally comfortable in the same way that that the rest, that Bridges or Brandon Miller have kind of found comfort, but he's got a great shot on it. In fact, he leads all NBA rookies this season in 3-point shooting percentage.
Okay.
He's the best shooting percentage of the entire league. And so I think what you're gonna see, or my question here, and what I'm really eager to see is is, are we looking at a young Anthony Simons on this team? Because he's got a sweet shot.
Yeah.
He doesn't have the confidence, and when you see him there, he kind of rushes some shots. He fades away when he doesn't need to. He does this kind of like, he kind of turns just, easy swing passes into running, jumping passes that kind of gets himself into trouble. But his shot is pure. And just like Anthony Simons had that insane breakout at the end of his rookie year, culminated by that Sacramento game where he scored for 40 something. I'm wondering if we might see that same thing out of Nick Smith.
I love this one. Yeah, I was surprised that they didn't mess that pick up when he fell that far, and I was impressed that they nabbed him. I was surprised it was the Hornets who did it. So come March and April, definitely Nick Smith is a player I'm more anticipating being a rosterable fantasy asset than Bryce McGowan's. Higher pedigree, higher. I think he's more skilled. The 3-point percentage is interesting. I'm wondering as the volume comes up, kind of what that will look like. But yeah, I think he's a super talented player. Probably the most intriguing potential usage vacuum as far as like a guard for guard out of the Terry Rozier trade. It's just like not happening all at once. But yeah, definitely want to keep your eye on. If you use the watch list feature, just click the star, file that away. But no, Nick Smith is going to have some lines that make us go, ooh, before the season's all said and done. Before the Hornets get their 12th win in April, we're going to see some nice Nick Smith lines.
nice subtle dig there, right there at the end. Well, that's all I got on the Hornets. And if you've been listening this long to the Hornets, so you clearly might be a little sleepy. So I might recommend that you head over to steelbridgecoffee.com/PTJ. Order yourselves up some really exceptional coffee. You're talking, this is about a nickel more, maybe a little bit less per cup than whatever just standard big coffee that you're getting from the grocery store. But this is getting delivered to your house. It's fair trade. It's organic, and it tastes awesome. Do yourself a favor, head over to steelbridgecoffee.com/PTJ and wake yourself up, just like this Grizzlies talk is about to wake us up.
So the bicycle deliveries are back on in the greater Salem, Oregon area post ice storm. Confirmed?
Yeah. I think, I don't know if you got over quite the sting of having to car deliver that one day, but I think it's at this point I saw him biking up there just yesterday.
Let's go. Check out the website. Okay.